right, Molly, it's so nice well, it's been, yeah, I was just saying like almost a decade maybe since I've seen you.
It could be that long. I don't know if I've seen you in the time since I like have had a child, which my God was almost 9 years ago, Adam.
I think it was right around that time. The last I remember really seeing you is when there was a blizzard in Seattle, and you were kind enough to let me stay in your basement.
That was 2008, dude.
That
I
was
remember
13 years ago. Okay, yeah, it's
I
been a long.
remember because it
Yeah.
was the winter before we opened Delancey. And you
Uh,
stayed in our basement. But then I also remember spending a New Year's with you and
yeah, you were
Greg.
so kind. You made us a whole dinner, and I remember it was like you had this little kitchen table, but it felt very like formal and festive, and like sort of like we might as well have been at the Four Seasons or something because it was
Oh
so
my
lovely.
God, dude, we were crammed into a duplex kitchen in Seattle. That's
I
very
loved
kind
it
of
though.
you.
No, it was so charming and wonderful. Well, Molly, congratulations on your new book. I just finished reading it. I know it's out in paperback now, and
Yes.
I loved it. I thought it was beautiful, so open and honest, and just also very interesting, especially as someone who knows you.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
curious, what's it been like for you to have this book out there in the world?
It's really good. It's interesting because I always feel so much relief
Mhm.
in getting to like tell my own story.
Mhm.
I think a lot of people look at it and people always say to me, oh, it's so honest or it's so brave, which I think is always a little bit like, I'm always worried there's an undertone of like, whoa, you've gone too far,
Well,
lady.
yeah, it's
Like
like if
that
somebody
was
says,
brave of you.
yeah, like your outfit looks is brave of you to wear that. It's like, oh, is
Yes,
that an insult or is that a
totally.
compliment? Yeah.
Totally. But no, I think that, whatever my orientation as a writer is,
Hmm.
I feel tremendous relief in telling my story, even if it is difficult or even if it's a story that brings up a lot of feelings in people.
Hmm. Well, I was
So,
curious because
yeah,
I mean, I've been a fan of yours for a very long time. We came up together as food bloggers.
we did.
And what was interesting about reading this book was that as a fan of your previous books, there was always like the food component
Mhm.
and recipes. And so I'm curious, like on your path or on your journey as a writer, do you see yourself returning ultimately to another food book, or do you think you're going to keep going down this path of moving away from food as a subject?
It's interesting because I really think writing about food taught me how to write.
Mm-hmm.
Like it was a really great way of learning how to write specifics, like
Mm-hmm.
learning how to write with detail, learning how to write scenes. But I don't feel compelled to write about it anymore. I think that I mean, my editor pointed out to me how much food there is in the fixed stars,
Mm-hmm.
like, or even, like food references or references to that kind of domestic life.
Yes.
But yeah, I don't find myself wanting to write about food anymore. What about
Wow.
you?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's a funny question. I've circled around it. I say this quote a lot on my podcast because it comes from Gabrielle Hamilton, but she wrote in her memoir, like, be careful what you get good at. You'll be doing it for the rest of your life.
Yes.
And it's like a curse. Like I think about that a lot because
Yeah.
I've written for TV and I've done like screenplays and stuff, but circling back to food is always comforting to me and comfortable. And sometimes I forget that there, I'll get an email from somebody. I'm sure you get them all the time. Like, I made your pasta this week, or I made that soup that you posted about, or even this week, somebody was like, I still make the salad you used to make when you lived in Brooklyn across from a Key Foods. And, it's like that's in a weird way, that makes me feel so much more connected to an audience than trying to write the great American novel or something. It's like, this is actually specifically touching people and affecting their lives.
It is interesting. I was just thinking that this morning. I was like brushing my teeth and looking at Instagram, that terrible habit. And I was like, oh my God, my granola will, and it's
Mm-hmm.
not even mine. I mean, like, it's like something I adapted from somebody else's recipe, but that granola is going to outlive me by
There's
decades.
chocolate in it, right? Chocolate granola.
Well, so that one is one of them, but then there's also this one I called granola number 5, which because it was the fifth granola recipe I had posted, and it's still the one that I make. It's basically, I think that the original version was from Early Bird granola, so an olive oil and maple syrup thing.
I remember olive oil was in that. I remember you had an olive oil granola, so that makes sense. Yes,
yeah. So anyway, mine is like, I think 2 generations adapted from the Early Bird recipe.
Wow. Okay. So I think when you said that you're not sure about food writing anymore, I felt like I heard thousands of hearts breaking across the world as you said that. I mean, because you still do your podcast, right? Which is about food, right?
Well, so it is about food, but I mean, the truth is it's kind of about food the way that I think I've always written about food, which is like, it takes food as this starting point and kind of runs from there.
Yeah, so, I do that too. I mean, that's what I love. That's my favorite food writing, is where food seems to be the subject, but it's not the subject at all. It's sort of the prompt that gets you there, or a symbol or something else. Well, I think another part of this, which you and I could both speak about, which is just food blogging in general, just like that form sort of having its heyday and then sort of starting to feel like it's drifted away, although some people are still doing it. I mean, for me personally, Substack has sort of become a nice outlet for me, because people who subscribe to my Substack, it's like, okay, they want to hear from me, so I'll write like little dispatches every week. But for you, was food blogging, was the blogging of it all, like the form of that, what was appealing, or do you think you would have found an outlet for food writing no matter what?
I mean, I think if I were starting today, I'd probably use Substack.
Oh, you would?
For sure. Okay. Yeah. Because I think like what drew me to the blog in the first place was the fact that it was this public thing. And even though in the beginning, nobody was reading it, and I would have been crazy to think anybody would, the fact that it was public made me feel accountable to it. Because I've never been one of those writers who is really disciplined about writing. Like, I don't have a daily writing practice. I mean, except when I'm deep in working on a book. But the blog was this like wheel I could chain myself to in a really positive way. And I think Substack does that now for people.
Oh yeah. Especially when people are paying for your words every week. Yeah. I mean, I have my Monday newsletter is free. But my Thursday one, people pay for it. And it's like, oh my God, like even today's Thursday. And it's like, I've got to write my paid newsletter because people paid for this. And it's definitely like hanging over my head throughout the day. So that's a good thing, I think.
Yeah. And I mean, it reminds me of, but it also reminds me of this feeling that I always had. Like I never wanted to run ads on the blog, in part because I didn't want the pressure of it.
Yeah.
Like I wanted the money, but I didn't want the pressure of being accountable to somebody other than, I mean, it was enough to be accountable to my readers, you know? So I don't know, maybe Substack is like a nice hybrid where you are accountable to your readers still, but also making money, like without the kind of intermediary of a corporation.
Well, it's funny because some people use Patreon, and that freaks me out. Like where it's like, hey, will you subsidize my creative lifestyle, like abstractly, like, and just sort of put money in my account? Like, I think it's nice to say, okay, if you give me money, I will send you a newsletter every Thursday and you'll pay for that. I mean, because there's something in our modern, like sort of, internet culture of supporting artists, it feels like there's a very gray area of like, you know, when are you taking advantage of people versus when are you genuinely supporting what you're doing, you know? So I think that I feel more comfortable with Substack. But to your point about ads, like I stopped doing my blog when Miracle Whip sponsored 3 videos from me, and I felt like I hit rock bottom because I was like, it was so disgusting. I should be careful what I say. I'm sure I'm going to get sued, but it was so gross. And I had to like recreate all these dishes with Miracle Whip. And I was like, I can't do this anymore.
It's so interesting though. Cause I even think about this with ads on our podcast.
Yeah.
Because, you know, we work with a broker, an ad broker, and we get to choose what ads we do and don't want to run. So there are all kinds of things we turn down. I mean, we've had like gun companies want to advertise with us, and we do not do that.
I'm sure you have a lot of listeners who love guns.
I hope not.
Yeah.
But you know, even the ones that we do run, yeah, it's always a challenge for me, even when it's a company I really like or a company I feel good about. It's such a strange like transaction.
Yeah.
And it must feel nicer, yeah, to get money directly from the people who are consuming your product. Like, I mean, I know that I feel really good about the like 4 or 5 Substacks that I subscribe to.
Yeah.
And that's a really nice feeling.
I feel that same way. Well, Molly, we've avoided the subject long enough. It's time to ask you now. Now, this is a little bit of a twist from our normal format because normally I'll say, "What did you have for lunch today?" But because we're doing this in the morning, this is going to be, "What did you have for lunch yesterday?" But I don't think it makes it less valid. I think we'll still be able to use it as a prompt to explore your life. So, what did you have for lunch yesterday?
Okay, I would say,
excuse me,
bless
I sneezed.
you.
Yeah, I don't know what that meant.
I also want to say just a second ago that my water bottle squeaked across my desk. And I just want to clarify it was my water bottle, not anything else.
Yes. And I really did just sneeze. That was not a water bottle.
Okay. Anyway, okay. So I'm, I realized as I was eating my lunch yesterday, I was looking at my calendar and I was like, oh yeah, tomorrow's the day I'm talking to Adam. And I was really glad that I had happened to choose the lunch I had because it is so typical of me. So here's what my lunch was. Okay. It was like a mishmash lunch. So I was at home, mishmash lunch of leftovers / something quick. So I had leftover. So the night before I had boiled some potatoes from our CSA box and just put salted butter and salt and pepper on them. And I feel like leftover boiled potatoes are never as good. Leftover potatoes, I don't think are ever as good as freshly cooked potatoes, but I had leftover buttered boiled potatoes that I had microwaved. Okay. I had leftover roasted zucchini from our CSA box. And I had a slice of like grocery store whole wheat bread with Tillamook sharp cheddar melted on it. So leftover boiled potatoes with butter, leftover roasted zucchini, and cheese toast. And this is a very typical lunch for me.
There's a lot that this raises so many questions and I don't even know where to begin. But
wait, do you want me to tell you what my lunch dessert was?
Yes, please. I want to hear all of it. Yeah.
Okay. This is another like very me thing. I had graham crackers and dark chocolate. And to me, it's like the best part of s'mores. But you can like eat it anywhere and you don't need a flame.
Well, that was my first question. It was about it was about temperature, because I noticed when you were talking about these various lunch items, you talked about like microwaving the potatoes. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how temperature functions in your food life. Like do you need your food to be hot? Would you be okay eating the potatoes cold out of the refrigerator? When do you need to heat something up? When are you okay with room temperature?
Wow. How specific do you want me to get, Adam? I mean, like
this is lunch therapy. Let's go.
Okay, great. So if it's potato salad, if it's a potato dish that is meant to be eaten cold, I will eat it like straight out of the fridge. Okay. Or if it's meant to be eaten at room temperature, I'll eat it straight out of the fridge. If it's something that I intended to serve warm, like those buttered potatoes, I mean, like they don't have a lot of other flavor going on other than the butter. And the butter, like, I mean, there was kind of like a smear of butter that I could still see visible. Like I needed to remelt that stuff,
Yeah. It's funny because we don't own a microwave in our house. So
you're one of those people.
Yeah. I mean, I just sort of took pride in it at the beginning, but now it's sort of annoying. It's like, actually, it would be nice to have a microwave. So keep going though. I want to hear more about your temperature journey.
Yeah, we use the microwave all the time for reheating food. I don't know what I would do without it. Yeah. So yeah, okay. The zucchini, my daughter loves zucchini and she will just like, in fact, as I was making my lunch yesterday, making in quotes, more like assembling my lunch, she came along and like was eating zucchini slices like cold out of the Tupperware that I was taking them out of. That's not my thing.
Really?
I need to take the chill off. Like I want them to at least be room temperature. So I don't need them to be piping hot. But yeah, I want them to be at least room temperature.
You know what my thing is texture. Because like if I roast zucchini to a certain texture and then I refrigerate it and then I were to heat it up again, I feel like it would get mushier.
It does. It for
Yeah.
sure does. I mean, like any, nice, I mean, I had roasted it so that, at least one side was really nicely browned and a little bit, just had a little variation of texture from the kind of middle. But yeah, I mean, it for sure just gets mushier, but I like mushy zucchini. I'm not one of those people who can't deal with mushy zucchini. Are you one of those people?
Yeah, I mean, I think I enjoy a roasted vegetable for the texture. Like, I think the texture is that and the char, but I think I like a bite to my vegetables. I like them to be toothsome, so to speak.
Oh no, I can totally roll with mush.
Ugh, no, I don't like mush. No, that actually made my stomach turn a little bit when you said that. Maybe it's good you're stopping food writing because you just made me nauseous. Well, Molly, the other part of your description of your lunch, which I think is much more like getting personal and like really going into your psychology, so I hope you're ready, was when you said this lunch is very me. Yeah. And that you were glad that it was very you, and it made me think a little bit about presentation, like how you like to present yourself to the world, like
wow, okay,
because you knew you were going to be talking about this lunch, and it made you happy to be able to talk about one that represented you, and so it makes me think about your books, it makes me think about your blog, it makes me think about, so it just feels like in that description of your lunch, it felt like it kind of opened a Pandora's box of all the things that kind of circle around your
Adam, you're really good at your job here.
Thank you. Yeah.
Nice job, dude.
Okay. Well, let's hear. I want to hear what you think about that.
Well, no, I think you're right. So I am not the kind of person who can rally to make myself I almost never make lunch. Like I will not turn on the stove and make lunch. Occasionally I'll make my daughter a grilled cheese and melt the butter, brush it onto the bread, do it in a cast iron skillet. But that is like lunchtime cooking for me. I do not want to cook at lunch, and I don't want to pretend that I do, because it is I just don't want to do it.
Got it. So you like this lunch because it represented a central truth about you. It's just that you're a lazy lunch maker.
I'm a totally lazy lunch maker, and I don't think that there's anything morally flawed about it. I'm totally cool with it.
But what's so funny about your lazy lunch making is there's so much attention to detail. It's like the Tillamook cheddar on the whole wheat bread, the dark chocolate on the ground. It's like everything still has an attention to detail. Yeah.
Well, and I think this was how my food writing was too. Like, I mean, if you look at my recipes, they were always like pretty ordinary, or not ordinary, but not highly spiced, not highly seasoned. I mean, beyond like salt. I think that, though I do certainly love like more flavorful cuisines and cook quite flavorfully, like at a baseline, I really just love, it's that old, like trite Alice Waters thing. Like, I really like taking something that's good and then like just cooking it so it tastes good without too many additional adornments. So yeah, these potatoes I had from our CSA, they were just like really good. You know how sometimes potatoes can almost be a little bitter, these were just like really good potatoes.
Right.
So I was just happy to boil them and I put like Kerrygold salted butter on them.
That's good.
And like, that was the stuff, man. I mean, I can't imagine anything better than like boiled potatoes with good salted butter.
So it's interesting because like the excitement that this represented you is sort of almost in its like humbleness, or like in its like lack of pretension, that it was sort of just a simple lunch that as opposed to like a lunch that wouldn't have represented you as well.
Or like, I mean, I would love it if somebody would come along and make me like an Otlanki recipe for lunch, with like 16 ingredients. But, I mean, Otlanki recipes have a lot of ingredients, but tend to be quite easy to execute. But still, I will never make myself an Otlanki recipe for lunch. And it's not because I don't think I'm worth it or because I don't have the time. It's like, I just don't care. I have these other
Yeah.
things that I like just as much. So Adam, will you come over and make me an Otlanki lunch?
No way. I can't do that. I'm a professional lunch therapist. That would violate my entire code of honor.
Okay.
Yeah, I can't
Okay.
do that. I mean, there's a certain kind of therapy where the therapist does that, and that's a different lunch therapy.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't
Okay.
practice that way.
Okay.
But one thing I picked up on when you were talking was about making a grilled cheese for June.
Yeah.
And that I related to that in the sense that, like, when Craig isn't here, and he says hello, by the way, not to break the fourth wall.
Hello, Craig.
Craig says hi. When Craig isn't here, I will be just like you and just literally scrounge through the refrigerator and find like a frozen soup and heat it up and just eat that.
Mm-hmm.
But when he is here, like, I'll go all out and I'll make like a nice lunch. I'll make a nice dinner. And I'm curious with June,
Yeah,
you make her a grilled cheese. Are you more likely to take the time and make a nice meal for somebody else than you are for yourself?
I think so. And I have to say, I think especially for my child, like somehow I feel like, well, I should also say that June really loves to eat and she loves to cook. And she is a really fun person to cook for and to eat with because she really loves it. And she notices things.
How old is she?
She's 8.
Wow. I can't believe that.
Oh my God. You would have so much fun eating with her. She's so fun.
To.
And I think she's definitely got like her dad's palate. Brandon was always better, Brandon is still living.
He's alive.
Brandon's better at like parsing flavors in a dish than I am. And June is really good at that. So I think, between the fact that I like caring for the people I love with food, whether it's my spouse or our child, I think also that I'm always up for going to the trouble to cook for people who I know love to eat. Like that's really fun.
Yeah.
And so June, I also love cooking for Ash, particularly the dishes that they really love that I cook. So I think that's it for me too. Like, I don't love cooking every night. I don't always love cooking for my people, but I love cooking for them because I can tell that it matters to them.
Well, I remember the first time I met you, I think you had us over, Craig and I, over to your house and made us lunch. And I actually think I remember what it was. I think it was like chicken breasts, like with the skin on, and like cider, like it was like braised in cider, I think.
I did that?
I think so. It might be on my blog. I'm sure I wrote about it.
Adam, yeah. I was trying to show off. Dude.
I guess so. Yeah.
That is
but that was a long time ago. That was like 5 decades ago. So,
That's true.
But I was curious when you were just talking a little bit about, I was thinking about audience for you, the idea of an audience, and that you said you like to make food for people who will appreciate it or people who enjoy food. And so I'm curious, like, how does the role of audience function for you when you're writing? I mean, are you thinking when you write, like, I'm writing for a specific audience, or are you writing to please yourself, or both?
I remember, especially when I was blogging and feeling that pressure to produce the way that we were talking about earlier. I remember at the time, especially because I was reading a lot of blogs, there were, months at a stretch where I had a particular like other blogger I was writing toward. And it actually wasn't generally, I had like a number of art and photography blogs I followed. But these people would always write a little bit to go along with their photos. And I really admired these people. And I remember writing in my mind to these people, like people who created a feeling in me. And so I wanted to write to them. And I think it continues to be the same, although like maybe less specific now. I think when I was writing The Fixed Stars, in many ways, I was writing what I wanted to read, which I think is always a good approach. But I think I was also writing because I wanted to be in conversation on the page with a lot of the writers whose work I was reading as I wrote the book.
Yeah, that's a big part of it is sort of like going on this journey with you. I mean, the other part about your writing is, as much as it's for an audience, it always feels like a journal almost. I mean, it almost feels like we're entering your private thoughts and we're sitting there with you. So it does feel like it's not for an audience, but in the same way it is for an audience. So it kind of sits interestingly on that line, which And I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about the link between that and your cooking, because I feel like that's kind of a fascinating thing to look at, is like when you're cooking for people versus cooking for yourself, when you're writing for other people versus writing for yourself.
It is interesting because if there is one thing that will like for sure stress me out or make me an unpleasant person to be around, it is making a recipe that I don't want to make. Or even, I mean, I have to say, like, June, my daughter, like still remembers this time that she used to watch MasterChef Junior.
Okay.
And we were once at Book Larder, the cookbook bookstore here in Seattle, and she saw a MasterChef Junior cookbook, and she was like, "Oh, can we get it?" And I was like, "Okay, absolutely, sure." So we got this cookbook, we brought it home, and she found in it this recipe for this layered, like parfait type dessert, but there was a layer of like raspberry gelée in it that was, set with gelatin. And then there was a raspberry mousse. And then there was some third thing. And I was so grouchy the entire time I was like helping her make this because it was so complicated. I didn't want to be doing it. And I would say in general that I'm a real repertoire cook. Like I do try new recipes all the time, but I get tremendous satisfaction out of making a recipe that is like my tried and true. And that feels like comfortable to me. And so, yeah, I mean, in many ways, I don't know. I think it's about, I think I'm really aware at any given time, whether I'm cooking or writing, of whether what I'm doing feels like me or not.
Well, that's a nice segue into your book, because it makes me think so much about the feelings you were feeling when you first felt an attraction to a woman and you were married to Brandon, and that it was once again like you being true to your inner voice. Or, I mean, the same thing that's telling you to eat potatoes for lunch, just like telling you that maybe you want to be with a woman. I feel like they're exactly the same. Potatoes for lunch. Yeah. Sex with romance women. With a woman. Yeah. Totally. But I feel like, I think that the through line with all of that is like this voice within you that's telling you who you are, or pulling you towards something that's authentic to you. And that it's hard for you to dial that down. I mean, even when you're cooking with June and she wanted to make that layered dessert, that was really hard for you to make this thing that wasn't you. And I feel like that I was a real jerk. She's always like, Mama, do you remember how cranky you were? I was like, this dessert is so stupid. Well, that leads me to another question, actually, which is, how do you think you'll handle June's differentiation eventually with food? Like if she starts getting into like fast food hamburgers, or I don't know, like gets into something that you're not as into. Do you think you'll be okay with that? Or you think you're going to try to steer her back into Molly world? No, I mean, we're all okay with fast food hamburgers just to, riff on that example. We're all into fast food hamburgers here. It's actually been interesting because she has decided to be a pescatarian. And I was, well, I mean, I referred to myself as a vegetarian because I don't think I knew the word pescatarian, but I was mostly vegetarian for like my late teens and the first half of my 20s. And now I eat everything. But it's been interesting for me and for Ash to try to kind of figure out how to be supportive, because if there's one thing that we believe in this household, it is we will never tell her what to eat, and no food is bad and no food is good. Yeah. So, I love that she knows what she wants and has an opinion about it. And I do my best to support it. But it's been interesting because, because it does mean thinking about the way that I cook or what I'm cooking so that I can, and to be fair, she still, like makes exceptions and things like that, which I think is wonderful and really healthy. And I'm glad she does. But yeah, it's tricky figuring out how to both empower her to be in control of her own body and what she wants, and also be the one who's cooking our meals most of the nights. Right, because there comes that question of like, I worked so hard on this, and she's like, I'm not eating it, and then it's sort of like, well, I respect your desire not to eat this, but also like I'm exhausted and eat it. Like I think that's like I think when I think about being a parent, which I'm not going to be, but like I always imagine, the fantasy of like, I'm going to make my famous roast chicken, or I'm going to make my famous cavatappi with sun-dried tomatoes, and my children were going to be like, Father, like, this is so delicious. But like, I'm sure that's not the reality at all.
Well, I have to say, I think that I think I have it pretty good in that she eats a wide variety of things.
Mm-hmm.
And because, we share custody with her dad. And
Mm-hmm.
so for half the week, she's not with us. So the half the week that she's not with us is when I do like spicier cooking.
Mm-hmm.
But inevitably, like, I think because I was sort of a vegetarian for so long, I think that in our household, like the things I'm inclined to cook are the things she likes to eat anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And then we get the luxury of being child free and eating whatever we want like half the week. And that is a rare thing and pretty cool for me as a cook. So honestly, I feel like it doesn't feel like too much trouble on the nights when she's here to make stuff that we all love to eat.
Mm-hmm.
And then to make, maybe more challenging stuff while she's gone. And then the best part is when she comes back, she finds the challenging stuff in the fridge and then she wants to eat it. And that's pretty great.
Yeah.
So then we slowly broaden the repertoire without the risk of like her not liking dinner. You know what I mean?
That's really smart. It's like the forbidden fruit, or it's like the thing that you're not, that this is too grown up for you. It's like, well, I want that.
Great.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, it makes me curious, like in your life with Ash, how has your food life changed since I knew you like 10 or 15 years ago? Like how has your cooking changed and your approach to food?
It's interesting because I think, I think that I'm still very interested in food, and I am definitely like the menu planner and the grocery shopper in our household, and it feels really natural to me and effortless. I think because I spent so long learning how to do that and caring about it. But food has a much less central role in my life now, being in relationship with someone who really is just learning how to cook and who has not historically been like as adventurous an eater as I have been.
Interesting. Okay.
So yeah, I feel like I'm working with a lot more kind of, preferences, likes and dislikes now, but I don't really care because I'm not trying to like write about it all the time or try new recipes all the time. Like it really appeals to the part of me that loves to have a repertoire of like 24 things that I make. And that food is a really enjoyable thing, but not something that I spend a lot of time thinking about.
It makes me wonder, like, why do you think food was so central to who you were for so long? And why do you think that went away?
I think that, I grew up in a family where food, I would say that the family I have now is similar to how my family was growing up in terms of food. Like food was a central part of our day. We always ate dinner together, and my parents really cared about what we ate, and they took pleasure in caring about it. My parents definitely were the kind of parents who would like travel, with a restaurant destination in mind.
I remember one of your books, like writing about your father and going to Paris with him and eating a croissant.
Yes.
Did I make that up, or is that really one of your?
No,
I have a memory of that. Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't feel that way anymore. Like the past few times that I've traveled, like food is just not a big part of it.
Right.
Or I don't spend a lot of time planning where we're going to eat or what we're going to eat. But, I think the period of my life when I was writing about food was much more at the fore of my life than it was in my childhood and than it is now. And in many ways, it kind of pushed my interest in it to not a breaking point, but like to an extreme where like I got tired of it. Like I was never interested in, I've always been a terrible recipe developer and recipe tester. Like I don't like making the same thing over again. I don't like fine tuning dishes. I want them to work the first time.
Me too. And I'm testing a cookbook right now. So it's like, yeah, I did this 15 times. No, I did it like 2 times.
Oh my God. Some people are so good at that.
Yeah.
And I am not good at that. So I would say the relationship that I have with food now feels just more natural to me and less like effortful than it did when I was writing about food. Yeah.
So
yeah,
Oh, go ahead. Keep going.
So I think, I think some of it is just like, I started writing about food for the blog when I was 26 and I became a full-time writer, writing mostly about food when I was, I think, 30.
Okay.
And so, now I'm about to be 43 and now I have a child. I have a second marriage. I just feel like I'm getting ever more aware of what I want and what I don't want. Like not interested in sort of like pushing to extremes, like just because I like food doesn't mean that I want to write about it or think about it or cook it all the time.
Well, I think that you had a very different journey, though. I keep saying journey, but that word keeps popping up. Than I did, in the sense that for a while, I mean, your second book was Delancey, and I feel like going into the restaurant part of food and the stresses of that, and how exhausting that is, could probably like
knock
the wind out of you. Yeah.
That's a really good point. And it's weird that I didn't think of that. So I've been out of the restaurant for just over 3 years now. And it is crazy to me how far away from it I feel.
Yeah.
Like, wow, it was such a like I look back and like I think I had to stretch myself so far to live in that world that like it's like a rubber band, like then once I was out of it and like snapped back to my normal shape, like it seems so far away from me. So but yes, I do think that being in the restaurant world, though, I do miss it sometimes. And I do miss that feeling of like knowing all the people who ran the restaurants around here and having that kind of broader community of like, being able to care for each other that way.
Yeah.
I miss that. But at the same time, running a restaurant and cooking in a restaurant and thinking about food the way that you do when you are, running a restaurant and cooking in a restaurant was never for me. And so I think, it made me all the more aware of what was me.
Well, it's funny because every so often someone will be like, Adam, why don't you open a restaurant? And sometimes I'll see like a space that's like, ooh, that would make a cute little restaurant. What if I like opened one up and like made my little food for everybody? But I'm curious, like if you had to sum up in some way, like what if you were trying to like open somebody's eyes to the realities of what it's like to open a restaurant, or the parts of it that you really struggled with the most, what would you say?
Oh my God, where to begin? The thing I have to say at the outset is like, I think I'm not a great person to ask about this because I so am not cut out for running restaurants.
But I think I'm the same as you. I mean, I love writing. I love being at home. I love being in my own kitchen. So I think we're very similar. So I'm curious what that was like for you.
Well, I think it's a number of things. Number one, it's extremely repetitive. Okay. So you are making the same things over and over and over again, within the course of an evening for sure. And most of the time, unless you're in fine dining and changing the menu every day, or in a tiny little place changing the menu every day, you are making the same thing repetitively. And there is this incredible pressure that is difficult to capture. And it's more than the pressure of knowing that there's people sitting in the dining room waiting for what you're making. It's this, I remember after we like officially opened Delancey, like August 12th, 2009, I remember thinking, oh my God, we're never not going to be running a restaurant. Like never. Like, because the thing is even, it doesn't, at least if you own the restaurant and cook in it, it never ends, in the sense that there's all the admin to do, but also there's the logistics of cooking, right? Like, in order to have things ready when you open the doors at 5 p.m. on a Saturday, you often need to be pickling things like weeks before, or you need to make the dough the day before. So you're never not aware of this, this creature that you are feeding and preparing and grooming so that it is ready for the world. And yeah, I just remember thinking, oh my God, like, it's like we've gotten on a train and you have to keep going.
And I think it's interesting to circle back to the earlier parts of our conversation where we were talking about pleasing yourself and pleasing an audience. It's like with a restaurant, it's about pleasing the audience. It's like, these are customers. They're going to write bad reviews on Yelp if you don't please them. It's like people expect to be, that's the part that freaks me out the most, is dealing with customers. And, somebody sends back their steak and they say it's too overcooked, but you think it's fine. Like, I can't even imagine dealing with that. At least at dinner parties, people are grateful and like, thank you. That's so nice. It's like when you're a paying customer, it just changes the whole dynamic. So I can see why food writing and food must be something that you're kind of eager to step away from, at least for a while. And I guess it leads to the question, like, where do you see your writing career going from here? Do you have another project in the works, or are you taking some time? Where are you headed?
So I am usually, I guess because I've always written memoir or personal narrative, I'm somebody who definitely needs time between book projects. And I often wish I didn't, but I don't know how to get around that. And so what's actually been really nice is I have taught workshops for the past decade, but usually it was like a one-off thing because I was running the restaurant or I was writing a book. And so somebody would hire me to write or to teach a workshop, and it would just be this freestanding 2 or 3 day thing, and then it would be over. But I always loved it. Oh my God, I loved it so much. And actually what's been amazing since mid 2020 is because I had 2 workshops lined up to teach during what became the early part of the pandemic. And the organizations I was working with really quickly shifted to doing teaching on Zoom. And so it forced me to learn how to teach on Zoom and to adapt curriculum I had to work on Zoom. And I still loved it.
That's great.
Despite the fact that it was on Zoom. So, right now what I do is I teach full time.
Do you teach food writing, or you teach memoir writing, or?
So I teach personal narrative broadly. Some of what I teach is geared toward, especially when I'm hired by an outside organization, they often ask me to do things that are food memoir related. But in truth, what I'm always teaching is how to get inside our memories and write effectively from memory. And food, I think, is a particularly good way of doing that. But there are so many other writers that we read and other approaches that we play with that food becomes just one of them. So yeah, now I run my own workshops and ongoing paid writing groups of adult students who are committed to writing personal narrative. And we meet weekly. And some of these groups have been together for coming up on a year now.
Wow.
And so, groups of 4 or 5 writers who have really gotten to know each other's work. And I provide guidance and sort of light curriculum each week, but we're mostly workshopping their work and they get to learn together.
Well, if I were in your class, the thing that I would ask you and that I admire the most about what you do is, how do you write so personally about the people in your life and not worry about what they're going to think about what you write? Because I have lots of stories about like my parents, my husband, and I live in terror of like writing something that will upset them. And so I'm curious, how do you get over that hump, and what do you tell your students about that?
Well, I imagine it's probably really different for you, like writing about Craig as opposed to writing about your parents, right? Like, it seems to me that the people who like, especially the people who are my chosen family, I have never struggled with too many fears about how they will respond to my writing, because they're usually there with me as I'm doing it. But at the same time, what I will say is I think it's really important that when we write, that we are always, that we are never claiming to represent anyone but ourselves. And what that means too is never making assumptions about what the other person was thinking in an interaction. It's always like, what did I notice on this person's face? Or what did this person say to me? Not like what I think they felt or, you know, whatever. So I'm always trying to show people the difference between writing, staying really firmly in my own skin, and representing only my experience. I think about it like, you know, our lives intersect with other people's at various junctures, right? And there are often really good stories there, but I can only write from like within my car. And that ultimately that makes it pretty limiting, actually. So the degree to which, even though if you look at my writing, it does seem like I'm saying a lot about another person. I hope that well, what you don't notice is like, I'm actually not telling you a lot about them at all. So even in my most recent book, there was a character who I called Nora, who was a really tricky character to write about because the points where my story intersected with hers were really problematic for me. And I felt in her presence in ways that were really troubling to me. And there's a lot that I knew about her that was not my business to bring to the page, but that informed her behavior, but it was not my business to write about.
Interesting. Okay.
And you'll notice if you look at it, I never tell you what she looked like. I never tell you what she looked like. You don't even know what color her hair is. You know you know roughly what her haircut looks like. You know that I was aware of her white teeth, and you know the color of the suit she was wearing, but you know nothing else about her.
Right.
So there are ways of writing that allow characters to come to life while still protecting them and still respecting their privacy. So I don't know, you know, I think I'm also really lucky that my family has just been really kind about letting me write about them.
Yeah, I mean, I had an interesting experience, which I've never talked about, so I'll open up to you, which is that I wrote a book proposal a couple of years ago called Eggshells, which was stories and recipes from a man-made marriage, because it was sort of like about my marriage to Craig. And I made it all about like our sex life. I just put like everything into it, and I made it so personal. And I was like, I was trying to like similar to you, like walk down a new path and be like, okay, I'm gonna like really open up here. And I sent it to my literary agent, and she's like, I don't think I could sell this.
What did she say? Like, I mean, why?
She just like, when I look back on it, I mean, this is the other thing I was going to ask you about, but like I think it was a little oversharey. Like I think it wasn't necessarily like, it didn't fit neatly into what I was known for, or like what people would want to buy a book for me about. It just sort of, I think I think the food element of it was so divorced from the other aspects of it that it felt like it was a weird marriage. I mean, speaking of marriage, but like it was just a weird marriage of form and content. It was like either this is like a memoir or like a humor book about being gay and married. She also said it's very hard to sell a memoir. She was like, it's difficult to sell memoirs. So that one got shelved. I mean, maybe I'll publish it someday, but I had that experience. Yeah.
I'm so sorry, God, to put so much work into that and then be told that.
It was rough, but at the same time, it was also eye-opening because I was like, okay, like what about this didn't connect with her, and why didn't, and I found other ways, like, you know, I'm working on a novel now, like I'm doing other projects that she's excited about. And so like, I feel good about, and I think it was just a weird, I think, and maybe it's a good question to ask you is like, do you ever encounter with your students or in your own work, a sense of oversharing, like that it's too much? And I think that might've been it with mine, but I'm curious, what is it for you? Like, how do you know?
I think that, For me, especially in writing the fixed stars, I tried to keep an eye on why is this story in here? Like, what is this contributing to the overall like themes of this book?
Mm-hmm.
And the fixed stars was very much a book about identity and like, what about us can we count on, and what is subject to change, and how do we live with that?
Mm-hmm.
And so, I remember thinking as I was writing some of the sex scenes particularly with the Nora character, I remember thinking, like, why does this need to be in here? Mm-hmm. Like, does this, like, on the one hand, I wanted it in there because they were some of my first encounters with a woman. Mm-hmm. But that wasn't enough to justify it. It needed to be in there, I came to believe, because in those encounters, I was being confronted with things that made me question my identity, or that directly pushed against my ideas of who I was.
You had to have that in there. I mean, it was like you raised the question at the beginning of the book, like, am I attracted to women? It was like the question kept growing and growing and growing. So mm-hmm. It felt essential to see that moment.
But even too, there's a part in the book where she tells me, like, queer sex isn't like this. Like, it mm-hmm. isn't this thing that you think it is.
Right.
And that was a really distressing moment to me. Mm-hmm. I remember saying to her, like, what are all these rules you're talking about? Like, are these your rules?
Right.
Like, just what you want and need as, like, your own individual person? Or is, like, wow, is she right? That, like, there's this manual on queer sex out there and I'm doing it wrong, and possibly even, like, in a way that's harmful to her.
Oh, so you didn't get it in the mail when you came out?
I didn't.
Did you? I'll send you my copy. Yeah.
Okay.
It's great. Yeah.
But I think that there's a lot of this in some circles of queer culture. And it was important to me to write about that too, about the ways that just because I was sort of throwing off the constraints of one identity doesn't mean that another one offered, like, liberation. Mm-hmm. So I think for me, like, always keeping in mind, especially when I am writing things that make myself look ugly, things that make other people look ugly, or things that are very revealing. I think it's important for me to always keep in mind, like, what purpose is this serving mm-hmm. to the overall narrative? Does it have to be here? Mm-hmm. And if somebody's going to come off looking not great here, it better be me.
Mm-hmm. Well, it makes me think also in terms of the book I tried to sell versus yours, is yours was a real story with a beginning, middle, and an end too. Like your character had an arc that you started in one place and ended in a completely different place. And mm-hmm. I think mine was more just like little dispatches from my life. And so I think that, to your point though, about oversharing versus not sharing, like sharing a bunch of personal stuff served your character's arc. Served the journey that you were on, versus, like, for me, oversharing was like, okay, like, why do we need to know this in your roast chicken recipe that you had sex the night before? It's like, where did that come from? So yeah, I think that oversharing is only oversharing if it doesn't serve the story. And
yes. Well,
there we go. We solved writing and all the issues. Nobody has to take your class anymore.
Thanks, Adam.
Just kidding. Molly, this was such a great conversation. We're not at the end yet. We're almost there. But actually, really, it was one of those conversations where, like, I got a lot out of that. So that was great.
Good.
I start every podcast by asking, what did you have for lunch? But I end every podcast with, what will you be having for dinner tonight?
Oh, for dinner tonight. Oh man. Okay. I'm glad you asked.
Thank you.
I am making this recipe that you've probably heard of. It is from King Arthur flour, and it's their, like, I think they call it crispy, cheesy pan pizza. Mm-hmm. Have you made it?
I haven't made it, but I've seen it.
It's really good. It's like a yeasted dough that, you make at least 12 hours ahead, and it sits in the fridge. It's a really good, flavorful dough, despite the fact that it's relatively quick. And then you put grated mozzarella on and then tomato sauce and then a little bit more grated mozzarella. And it cooks in a cast iron skillet with a fair amount of olive oil so the bottom gets crispy. It's so good. So we're having that tonight, and probably just like a green salad. I've got some good lettuce. This is like peak CSA time. So I've got some really good lettuce.
Is it with June and Ash, do you find yourself like meal planning, like thinking ahead, like we're having this tonight, we're having this tomorrow, or do you no, it just
the only reason that I know this is because I made the dough last night.
Okay. And it's kind of a fitting like a metaphor, like a nice image of your old life at Delancey, making the dough the night before for all the customers versus now making a night dough night before for your family, which is a nice transition for you.
Yes.
Well, I guess I could also ask you, what will you be having for lunch today?
I'm going to have leftover yakisoba because we had yakisoba last night.
Dumb question. What is yakisoba? I know what soba is, but I don't know what yakisoba is.
Well, so yakisoba is basically Japanese stir-fried noodles.
Okay.
So I don't believe the noodles are not buckwheat, but they are a wheat noodle. When I make yakisoba, I usually put bacon in it. So it's also cooked in a little bit of bacon fat. I love doing cabbage and onion. Little bit of fresh ginger, scallion, and then the flavoring, the sauce can either be tonkatsu sauce or my preference, which is like equal parts soy sauce and mirin and some chili crisp.
Yeah.
And that gets all mixed in at the end of the stir fry.
And soba noodles can hold up to a stir fry. I don't think I've ever had stir fried.
Well, so it's not, I've never had it with soba noodles. I don't know. My friend Matthew, who knows Japanese food a lot better than I do, or better yet, a actual Japanese person could probably tell us why it's called yakisoba.
Oh, so soba's not in the dish.
Soba's not in the dish. It's a wheat noodle, but it's not a buckwheat noodle.
Got it.
Yeah.
Well, I have one last question for you, which is a big question, but it has nothing to do with you personally. It's more to do with Seattle, because I associate you so much with Seattle, and my husband, as you know, is from there, and I visit every so often. But it seems like the city has changed quite a bit in the last 10 years, and I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about that and how Seattle has changed and what that's like for you and how you feel about it, and if you still love living there, because Amazon has come in, right?
So, I mean, Amazon has been here for a long time, but part of what's shifted is the amount of like money that's been invested by tech companies in the South Lake Union area, which used to be kind of a like industrial, just kind of warehouses and stuff. And yeah, I mean, now there's like a real like campus, like tech campus vibe in South Lake Union. And to be honest, I feel like it's a totally different city there. And so I think that the experience of somebody who is in their 20s and working for Amazon or Google in South Lake Union lives a completely different version of Seattle than I do. For me, I live in the suburbs, and the main thing that I notice that is hugely troubling to me is, and now we're just going to end your podcast on a real downer note here, is the huge explosion of people without homes.
Yes.
And, whereas it used to be concentrated very much in sort of the downtown areas, like our neighborhood, sort of like Central Plaza where the library is and stuff, is a very, has become a really good spot for a tent city. And so it's really heartbreaking. Yeah. This intense wealth and investment going into this one part of the city, and then seeing people living really difficult lives, increasingly spread out all over the city, just so much.
I think that, LA is
struggling
like that too. I mean, the reason I bring it up, and this is actually a happier note to end on, is that, we have a lot of friends moving out of LA. And so Craig and I have been talking a lot about, okay, where would we go if we were to leave LA? And so New York is definitely a possibility to go back there. But
Mhm.
Seattle definitely comes up as a place that we could potentially go one day. So if I move to Seattle, I hope that I can cook you an Otlanki lunch someday.
Please.
Yes.
Although I know that would be breaking, that would be, crossing
Yeah.
a boundary here with the lunch therapist
I
thing.
think enough time will have passed. I think it's okay to become friends with your therapist if you haven't seen them for a while,
Yeah.
Well, Molly, this was a delight. And it was so nice to see you again after so much time. Let's not let so much time pass before our next conversation or hangout.
Oh, I would love that. I would love that.
Yeah,
And I loved being on the show. Thank you so much for inviting me.
absolutely. And congratulations again on the book. And if you're listening to this, everybody go buy The Fixed Stars now in paperback, right?
Yes, indeed.
All right. Thanks, Molly. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.